In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is Drew Hill, joined as always by my colleague Chris Herrington. We are barreling towards an NBA Finals matchup. We don't know who the teams will be yet, but the playoffs have certainly gotten a lot more interesting. We will get into that. Chris did a mailbag recently. I have a story out with John Martin. So this will be a pretty loaded, quote, off-season, I guess, podcast. Not quite the off-season yet in the NBA, but it is for the Memphis Grizzlies. But let's start with the mailbag, Chris. I'm always impressed by the number of questions you get. You always get a ton of questions, man, and good ones, too.
And that's only the first half. There's another half I'm going to write this afternoon. We're recording on Thursday afternoon, midday. And when we're done, I'm going to walk to a neighborhood coffee shop, take advantage of the nice weather today because it's going to be rainy here next couple of days. I'm going to walk to a neighborhood coffee shop, and I'm going to try to knock out part 2, which will be up next week.
Some good questions, I thought, in the first one. We can get into some of those. Maybe I should have sent this over to you. I sent you a list of topics, but I didn't send you this. Did you have a favorite question, by the way? Was there anyone that you felt like you was difficult to answer or you liked answering?
Well, yeah, there was a question, and I think it pertains maybe to the list of topics you sent. So it's sort of, we were going to get into it anyway, but I'm going to try to pull it up. There was a question that I thought was particularly perceptive, and it gave me some stuff to chew on that I was already sort of wanting to chew on. And that was it was an email question, and it was about sort of, or about title cords getting younger, and sort of about reacting to the Spurs Thunder series and the idea of these relatively young teams that are maybe the two best teams in the league, and how that maybe relates to the Grizzlies when you're thinking about a rebuild. I thought that was an interesting question that I thought had lots to chew on, and I tried to gnaw on a little bit of it.
Yeah, there's several different ways I think that you can kind of go off of those questions, and you did throughout the mailbag and answered a lot of different questions. But one of them was just the, I guess, dread that exists watching this Western Conference Finals, because you're thinking about it in terms of, well, yeah, the Grizzlies have a top 3 draft pick. Yeah, they have a nice group of pieces that could turn into good players. Yeah, they have a lot of future draft assets. But is any of it going to matter when you watch what Wembanyama? Like, I don't want to spoil that. Like, we should talk about that series. Yeah, but that does exist. I think it exists for everyone that's a Grizzlies fan watching.
The person who asked me that, there were follow-up. That was a social media question. There were follow-up sort of posts from there that made it clear that he was sort of venting. He wasn't serious about, why bother. It was just sort of venting in the moment. But the point I made is, yeah, the Thunder and Spurs are awesome now, and they're wildly well set up to continue being really good. But, there's 13 other teams in the West, and maybe 14, in a couple of years if they expand, and, they can't all just give up. I mean, there's still a lot of fun to be had if you're 3, 4, 5, right? Even if you bump up against the glass ceiling of Thunder Spurs, I think, winning 50 games and winning a playoff series and all that would be a lot of fun, especially relative to the Grizzlies basketball we've had the last few years, something to strive for. And the other thing is, these teams are this is not going to be the Western Conference Finals for the next 10 years uninterrupted. Stuff will happen. Stuff always happens.
Yeah, to a lesser extent, I think you have to kind of look at what's happening in the East, because the Knicks, it feels like, have had lots of chances to potentially get to a finals, and they've kind of run into a few buzzsaws there on their way to this opportunity. And this kind of feels like their chance to finally make it to the finals. Like, the Celtics got knocked out early. Things kind of went their way. That's what you're hoping for, right? And something you kind of underlined in the answer in the mailbag, which is that you never know when your opportunity is going to pop up. It's worthwhile to try to be good for the next 7 to 10 years, and then maybe your opportunity will come. So you can't predict things like that. And look at what's happened in the Western Conference Finals already. You've already had key players get injured, right? Dylan Harper hurt last night.
Jalen
Jalen
Williams hurt last
Williams
night.
hurt last night. De'Aaron Fox hasn't played two of the game. Like windows open that you don't anticipate. And so the goal is to be good for as long as you can possibly be good and hope that some things break your way instead of going the opposite direction, which feels like has happened a lot of times for the Grizzlies in their last iteration of the team. So, yeah, no, I agree, and I thought you gave a good answer there, brief but to the point in the mailbag. And then another question was to spin off of that a little bit, just about team building and if you can construct a team the way OKC and San Antonio did, if you're Memphis. And I think that's an incredibly hard thing to do, right? And you kind of pointed out that, the Spurs got Victor Wembanyama, and then they got Stephon Castle, and then they got Dylan Harper in back-to-back drafts. And so that probably isn't a type of, roster building strategy that the Grizzlies will be able to follow. But there's other ways to try to be good. I mean, OKC's a whole different story. They traded for an MVP. They made good draft picks beyond that. They stockpiled assets. The Grizzlies have already done that. What did you make of just that piece of it, the roster building piece of it, when you look at the Grizzlies and you compare them to the Thunder and the Spurs?
Yeah, there's always a temptation to just mimic whatever's just been successful, but that doesn't mean that's going to be the thing that's successful next. The point I made, this was one interesting part of it. The new lottery rules have not been voted on yet. I think they're going to be voted on next week. But the rules seem likely to change in a way that's going to prevent a team from doing what the Spurs just did, which is have three top four picks 3 years in a row. Two of them sandwiched around a number one pick that was the most valuable number one pick in a generation. To me, it was sort of the fact that they had that run of luck right before the rules changed, and in part the rules are changing because of that run of luck. I liken to when the Warriors, after winning 70 games in a title, used a 1 year cap spike to sign Kevin Durant. And then something that they could not have done the year before, the year after, no one else could do after that because it was literally a 1 year cap spike that the players union did not want to, you know, extend over multiple seasons and smooth it out. They just wanted it all at once, and that created an opening for the Warriors to add Kevin Durant to a title team. And so there we are. And so some things you can't mimic, right? It's just this fortunate thing this franchise got, and there they are. But what I think is interesting, what I thought was interesting about the question is the idea of our championship cores getting younger, and it's the kind of thing I'd like to spend a few days researching. I did not have time to do that, but I think it's broadly true. I think it's true, and I think it's true in part because there are reasons that it would be true. And you look at the Spurs team; it's a little bit different in the East, right? But even the East, the only major player on those teams that's over 30, I think, is Harden. Like maybe Brunson, Mitchell are right around that. But the era of you have these star players who are 32, 33, 34, like a generation ago we might have seen, that's not happening right now. And if you look in the West, the top three players, if you set aside Fox, who has not played in the series, the top three players on the Spurs are these three guys all on a rookie contract right now. And with the Thunder, two of the three, and I'm talking about Chet Holmgren, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, two of those three players are still on rookie contracts. Now, Williams and Holmgren have signed extensions that kick in next year, so it's over next year. But the team that won a title last year for OKC, that was a young team where two of the top three players were on rookie scale contracts. The Spurs team might have three players on rookie scale contracts. I think two things are happening. I think one, the style of play in the NBA, the faster, more spread out, more intense, it's causing more injuries, and that's something that may lead to some rule changes. But because of that, I think it's making it harder on older players over 82 games and four playoff series. And I think that has helped bend playoff basketball back towards youth in a way that used to be like playoffs were for the old guys. Like you young guys have your fun in the regular season. It's postseason now. These 34-year-olds who know how to play are going to kick your butt. That is not as true anymore, and I think it's partly because of the wear and tear and the intensity. But then the other thing is the team building. Because of the rules and the aprons and all of this kind of stuff, it's harder to maintain teams with multiple stars as they get later in the late 20s and 30s because the contracts get so high. And so I think you're going to see now that the most purely talented teams are going to have a player, on a rookie scale contract, or at least on the first max after the rookie scale, not the second bigger max, right? I think the financial incentives are such that the most talented teams are going to skew a little bit younger because you're going to want a Wemby, a Holmgren, a whoever. And so this idea of trying to get good while you still have guys on rookie scale contracts, which is what the Grizzlies did in 2021-22. That team that won 56 games and, was second in the West, that was a team that had top level players still on rookie scale contracts, which gave them the financial flexibility to have this great bench and all this other stuff. And so you take all of that together and you apply it to this Grizzlies rebuild. To me, what it suggests is that the building arcs and the rebuilding arcs and all of that are moving quicker right now. And that ties into what Zach Kleiman was saying about this is not a 5-year plan, right? The era of the 5-year plan's over. And so you have to be ready to be good quicker. Now, that's not going to be this season for the Grizzlies, but they got to be prepared for it maybe to be the season after that or the season after that. When you still have a Coward on a rookie scale contract, you still have an 80 on a rookie scale contract, you still have whoever you take at number 3 on a rookie scale contract. You need to plan to be a contending team during the span in which at least one of those players is still on the cheap.
I got 2 things off of this. To take this back off of the Grizzlies for a second, this is actually something you see in the NFL a lot right now. They talk about teams trying to contend before you have to pay your quarterback, right?
Yeah.
That's the same thing copied in the NBA, is trying to be competitive before you have to pay your top 3 players. It works differently, obviously, different sports, different cap rules, but it's the same type of thing, same strategy. The other is, do you think some of this is just there's a life cycle to championship level NBA stars, and we're moving out of the Curry, LeBron James sort of era of the NBA and Durant into a new one? And naturally, this is just naturally going to happen. This is just history repeating itself. And of course, championship teams are going to get younger, and that happens over and over and over again across the course of history.
Well, part of this is like there was a generation in between, right? There's a generation in between because you went through a period of 5 years where 5 straight years the MVP was shared among 3 players, and it was Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Those 3 players have combined for 2 titles, right? I mean, typically the multiple MVP level guy is winning multiple titles himself, and for whatever reasons, those teams with those players didn't sustain in the same way. With Embiid, partly it's because he couldn't stay healthy. That's a little bit of the story with Giannis. He actually had a lot of injury issues in the postseason, but you never had the true back-to-back finals team, dynastic kind of teams around that generation of players. So is this next generation going to have that? Is Wemby going to have that? Wemby is set up to have that in a way that those guys never were. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander has been set up to have that. It's not just that Shea and Wemby are great, it's that they have these great teams around them, that the teams both through luck and through luck mostly with the Spurs and skill mostly with the Thunder, they've had these really great teams built around them. Like, who are the other great players coming up after them? Is it Cooper Flagg? Is he going to have that kind of team built around him? They're not as well set up for that. Luka Doncic has not had that. And so, I don't know. But certainly, I mean, Wemby is the kind of guy who's just different. I know SGA's won back-to-back MVPs. Wemby's a different tier of talent. He is the Tim Duncan, Shaquille O'Neal, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar level of player. And that just may change the rules on everything.
Another topic touched on several times in the mailbag is trading up in the draft. Not only trading up from 16, which I think is enticing to a lot of people, but trading up from number 3, which is an interesting topic because I don't think if you followed Zach Kleiman's draft history, you could completely rule it out if they really feel like they can't get their guy at number 3. The more I've thought through it and the more I've talked to some of my media colleagues about it nationally, I just see a scenario in which it feels like Boozer, with all of the advanced analytics, would be a guy that the Grizzlies would want, and it just feels like he's also going to be there at 3. So,
Right.
but I suppose there is the chance that there could be enough smoke or intel or whatever that if it's Boozer or Wilson or whoever their guy is, and they don't think they're going to be able to get them, that they might decide to trade up in the draft. Although it seems unlikely to me. What were your thoughts on that?
We're a month out from this thing, and there's going to be lots of antsiness and lots of smoke screen and lots of, talking yourself into different scenarios and all of that. It's funny. I popped onto social media literally like an hour ago, and I happened to come across a Utah Jazz blogger who posted, I'm terrified that Utah picks second, Washington picks first, for people who have not memorized the order. And he posted something like, I'm terrified the Wizards are going to take Darren Peterson. And so I think one thing that's happened here is there's what's happening internally among these teams, and there's what's happening in the conversation around them among media and fans, right? And I don't think there's a lot of true penetration at this point between those two things. I think teams try to play pretty close to the vest, especially this early on. And also teams still may not totally know. I mean, they're going to go through the process. They're going to bring guys in. They're going to take them out to dinner. They're going to, go through the medical testing. They're going to bring them into the gym. They're going to have meetings. I don't, I don't think teams leave as soon as the lottery happens. They are 100% deadlock on what they're doing. And so there's room for movement. But I think one of the things that's happened is the lottery happened and an immediate conventional wisdom formed because it made sense. It still makes sense. And it was, okay, so so Washington takes AJ DeBanza. Utah, they'll take Darren Peterson. That makes sense. Memphis, they'll take Cam Boozer. That makes sense. And then, Chicago's left with Caleb Wilson. So that was the conventional wisdom. And I think fans and observers, those teams, especially probably the Jazz and the Grizzlies, looked at that and said, you know what? That's pretty good. We're pretty comfortable with that. Then you start thinking about your team. Like it's already happened. Like, oh man, Boozer, he's going to look great with Edie. And if you're a Jazz fan, you're like, we got Peterson and he's going to be like spreading the floor around these bigs. And like, it's like the draft's already happened and you're thinking about what your team's going to be. And then you get so comfortable with that outcome, you start to worry the outcome won't happen. And then you start talking yourself into the outcome's not going to happen because like, oh my God, the Utah is going to take Boozer. We want Boozer. Of course the Grizzlies want Boozer. Of course he's number one on their board.
What if Washington trades the number 1 pick?
Right. What if they move down to 2 and then they're going to take Boozer and Boozer's he's number 1 on the Grizzlies board. No one knows whether he's number 1 on the Grizzlies board, but everyone's decided that he is. And you're a Jazz fan, you're like, man, Peterson's great, but oh no, Washington's going to take Peterson. We're not going to get Peterson. And all this stuff starts happening. And so my read is still that the top 3 of this draft is so strong. I don't think there's a lot of incentive for teams to try to move up, for the Grizzlies to move up from 3 or from Utah to move up from 2. I think people will probably stay put and take who they take. I still haven't done, you haven't either, but I haven't done like my ranking. But I'll just say that, like, if you're talking about, like, taking Boozer at 3 or settling for Darren Peterson, I'm pretty comfortable with either of these scenarios from a talent perspective and a fit perspective for the Memphis Grizzlies. And so I would sort of be surprised to see them move up. If the implication is you're moving up for Boozer because you don't think Boozer will be there, that's a plot twist. It's a plot twist that might happen, but it is a plot twist.
Yeah, think logically. That's how I would that's the advice I'd give. Just think logically through the situation. Now, if you are Washington and you have the number 1 overall pick, and you know that the Jazz owner is heavily involved in BYU athletics, may have played a role in getting AJ DeBanza to go play at BYU, and you have Darren Peterson number 1 on your board, sure would seem to make a lot of sense to try to say, hey, look, we don't need everything, but we'll take a few assets if you'd like to come get your guy. And ultimately, You're going to get your guy anyway. Now put yourself in the shoes of the Utah Jazz.
Yep.
If you're the Utah Jazz, you could say, hey, if we get AJ DeBanza, that'd be great. Everybody would be really happy. Played high school ball at BYU, in Utah, played college ball at BYU, could play pro ball for the Utah Jazz. He's already been around all the people in our building. He would be a great fit. We think he's going to be a great player. Or we could end up with Darren Peterson, who's positionally the best fit we could possibly have on this team. And we already traded for Jaren Jackson Jr. We might be pretty competitive next year with the Darren Peterson in our lineup. So why would it make any sense for us to go trade with the Washington Wizards? Doesn't make any sense to us at all. And then if you're Memphis, you're sitting there looking at that scenario going, well, that makes perfect sense to me. I don't know why I would need to trade up because it seems like these two teams pretty much have it figured out what they would like. So I don't know. I think if you think through it logically and you go step by step and you look from the perspective of each individual team, it's really hard to come off of these teams just picking an order. The only
Yeah,
thing I
I
think
agree.
the only crazy curveball I think could get thrown out is if Washington were to trade the pick to somebody that, you know, is not in the top three right now, which would be wild, given the talent in this draft. So
Well,
I'm with you on that.
there also, and at this point, I think it's mostly fans inventing scenarios, but there also could be at some point some smokescreen kind of stuff. Like even if you are Utah at two, and Peterson is sort of who you're going to take. But if you believe that the Grizzlies are dead set on Cameron Boozer because the fans have decided the Grizzlies are dead set on Cameron Boozer, you could make it sound like, we might take Boozer at two, and then you try to force the Grizzlies to trade up to you at two to get Boozer, and you just get Peterson at three and get an extra pick or whatever. I think that kind of smokescreen maneuvering like happens in drafts. It doesn't usually result in deals. There may be some of that going on, but also another thing is it's not crazy for any of these teams to be thinking about any of these players. They are not only should they are thinking about these players. Utah is contemplating Cameron Boozer at two. They are. That doesn't mean they're going to take him, but like that's the job. They're going to bring him in. They're going to have dinner with him. They're going to have him in the gym. And the Grizzlies
Yeah.
are going to do that with these guys too. They're going to do it with Caleb Wilson. They're going to do it with Boozer. They might do it with Acuff.
The
This is
crazy
the
thing that
job.
I've made up in my head as part of this process that you're describing is just like, man, Carlos Boozer is part of that Jazz organization.
Right.
What a great story that would be. And I just see that's enough to go, ugh, I don't know, And you're right. You convince yourself that there's all these possibilities, and then when you break it down logically, it just doesn't seem like it's as likely. But crazy things happen in the draft. You never know.
I mean, I remember when the Philadelphia 76ers drafted, I think it was Mikal Bridges, and his mother was in the organization. They drafted him, and his mother was in the organization, and everyone talked about what a great story that was. This is going to be fantastic. And then 15 minutes later, he was traded. And then they brought in Zaire Smith or whoever instead. So I don't. I put more stock in the Jazz owner AJ DeBanza stuff than I put in the Carlos Boozer as a scout for the Utah Jazz stuff. Thus, that will influence his, whether they want his son or not. I just don't put much stock into that.
Another one of the questions that was brought up in the mailbag is the possibility of trading up from 16. I get the sense, like, I have plenty of friends in Memphis that are all Grizzlies fans, and I think everybody's talking about the scenario of possibly trading up from number 16 and going to get a guard to pair with Boozer or Wilson in the front court. And it's certainly an enticing idea, and I get why everybody is excited about it. I have a harder time, and I think I got this from your mailbag, believing that they're going to be able to jump up into a 5, 6, 7 class of guards because I think the price is going to be high to do something like that in a trade. I'm not saying
Right.
the Grizzlies wouldn't be willing to do it. They've you know I think been willing to shove assets in the past to move up in the draft, but I feel like that price would be pretty high to try to get all the way up there. I actually was asked on Jason and John today, how much more do you think the price will be in this draft versus maybe last year to move up to number 11? Like, is it going to be another first round pick? I don't think there's any way to really know that without
Right.
having a deeper understanding of the market than we're able to get to.
Is
But
it is interesting that we do have a year to year comparison to that kind of trade, right? We know what it took last year. It was a future first, unprotected future first, 2028 Orlando Magic. It was a 2028 Magic first and two future seconds to go from 16 to 11.
yes, but in a better draft, you would have to think that the cost is higher to some degree.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not, but you would think. I I think if you're going to go like, if you're going to move up, I mean, the Clippers might be interesting at 5 because they have a point guard, Darius Garland,
Right.
they just traded for. So they are interesting as a potential trade candidate. But then beyond that, I think you're having to look deeper in the draft at 10, 11, 12, that sort of range. And I think the question is how much do the Grizzlies like the other guards? How much do they like Michael
Right.
Brown? How much do they like LeBaron Philon? Kingston Flemings. So
Braden Burries.
Braden Burries, right. I think that's more of the range that you're looking at it in terms of a trade up, for a guard scenario out of the Grizzlies in this draft. Have you thought at all about any of the potential teams that may move
Yeah,
around?
I actually think I think starting at 5, I think you could see movement, and I think because the Clippers, as you pointed out, they ended up getting that fifth pick, which everyone is going to focus on guards, lead guards as the best players there, and they just traded for Darius Garland. Now, Darius Garland is not so good. You can't if you think Darius Acuff or Kingston Fleming or Keaton Wagler's a star, you don't take that player, but it does, I think, open the door for some movement, even as high as 5. I just think if the Clippers move off of 5, they're doing one of two things. Either they're just moving down a little bit, like they're good move down from 5 to 7 because the Kings just really want Acuff and some small move like that, or they're moving out for a veteran to put next to Kawhi. Like, is that a team that gets involved in the Giannis stuff? It says, okay, we have the 5th overall pick. Let's start there. Giannis for the 5. Let's build out from there as a starting point. Like, that's the kind of thing I could see happening. Going down from 5 to 16 on a team that has Kawhi Leonard and Darius Garland and probably wants to be competitive right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it doesn't really help you in the short term because the Grizzlies, I think, don't have the veteran player to attach with that. I don't think John Moran is that guy. But if you want to rebuild, you're moving down. I just don't see that. So I think if you're the Grizzlies trying to move up, you're probably looking at more of that 9, 10, 11, 12 kind of range. Milwaukee is super interesting just because no one knows what's going to happen there. Are they trading Giannis? Are they not trading Giannis? What does that do to them? If they're going into a rebuild, they may want to stack assets and maybe moving from 10 to 16 in this draft is not that big of a deal to them if it means they're going to add a future pick or two as part of a longer term rebuild. Maybe that's a place you could move up. One question I have, and I don't want to answer it definitively right now because I think I may write about it at some point because we got to come up with stuff to write about for the next month. But I don't know if you've thought about this at all, would the kind of guard you want to trade up for be different depending on who you pick at 3?
I mean, maybe, but like I think Boozer as a creator
Right.
is like that's his separating skill,
Yep.
compared to the other players that could potentially be available. And so the ball would play through him more. And so
Right.
maybe you're putting more of an emphasis on shooting rather than playmaking at guard. So I don't want
Flip,
to spoil
flip
your
it,
column
flip
either,
it, flip
but
it the other way with a Caleb Wilson.
right.
Wilson is a play finisher. So is Zach Edey. If you have two play finishers in your front court, that puts a lot more emphasis on having a point guard who can, dominate the ball and make plays for people. And so I think this is ultimately about talent, but I do think once you have like tentpole players in place, your team building decisions start to flow from those players to some degree.
I think where you might be going with this is that you would think a player like Burries would be a better pair for Boozer, where Michael Brown or LeBaron Philon might be a better pair for Wilson.
Yeah, you might be picking up what I'm putting down. I mean, that is something that I've thought about relative to those players. I'm interested to see how far down those guys will go, right? Like at what point guards are still there at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and how well did you think that fits with the way your team's building? But I do think at some point, I mean, I think they're still in the talent acquisition phase. But at some point, once you start putting the tentpole players in place and you're starting to build the tent around them, you got to think you start thinking more about flowing from those key players in terms of how you build the rest of the team.
Okay, last thing from the mailbag. There was a question about expectations next season. It seemed to be a little pessimistic that said, what, max 30 wins for
Right,
this
right,
team
right.
next year? I don't think there's a max of 30 wins for the team next year. I don't think they're going to be projected to be a play-in or even a playoff team. They might be on the fringe of the play-in. I do think that maybe the change with the, I'm using air quotes, relegation at the bottom, where you get worse draft odds if you finish in the bottom three, or lottery odds if you finish in the bottom three, will make the end of the season more competitive, which will probably mean wins are harder to come by in March if you're still playing for something. But you add a player like Boozer or Wilson, you add another player in the middle of the first round, you get more, maybe a healthier Edie, you get more development from Cedric Coward, and a full season of Ty Jerome if he's on the roster. And I think the ceiling is way over 30. I mean, it's, closer, much closer to 500 or better.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be clear, I do think the floor is under 30. I do
Well,
think it's
yeah,
possible. I do think it's possible that the Grizz are a sub 30 win team. It would not surprise me if they were picked to finish 13th or 14th in the West, which would put them in that territory typically. But I certainly am not ready to put a ceiling of 30 wins on the team next season. To your point, I think there are scenarios where you have a really competitive team next season and a team that is competitive and also gives you a quick path to better. That's certainly the hope. But it's early. I mean, they haven't even started the process of building from the current point yet. So we'll see.
onward to one other topic before we get to the playoffs. I wrote a story over at the Daily Memphian with John Martin. And by with John Martin, I mean I wrote the story, but John helped me with it. Um, John gave me a hard time on the radio today, so I get to give him a hard time back on the podcast. Um, it's pretty cool. So Mike Miller said for 15 years he'd been drawing on a napkin this idea of like having this training facility at his house in the suburbs of Memphis, and now has his own agency with Lyft. He's not the only player rep, but he is probably the most prominent one. Um, and they've signed a bunch of players in this draft class, of which includes Jaden Quaintance, LeBaron Philon, Abuka Okori, and Joshua Jefferson, all who could be first round picks, some who could be lottery picks. And they are training here in Memphis at this new facility. Like I can't describe what it's like accurately on the podcast. Like I would encourage you to go read the story and see the photos. But essentially it's this giant barn that has all this recovery stuff that they would need, saunas, all that, a huge pool, a fancy basketball gym with murals of NBA greats everywhere, replica Miami Heat championship banners. I talked to Javante Holmes, who coached at East High School and has trained Will Barton and several other pros. And he said, like, look, I've been around pro facilities, and this is the best facility I've ever seen. I know Mike poured a ton of investment into building it. And it's just a really cool thing that now it's bringing future NBA stars to the city, and they're doing their pre-draft stuff here. They also are going to, the clients are going to have access to that during the season, during the off season to train. I know Paulo Banchero's already been in Memphis. He's already been at this facility. So at a time when a lot of what we've talked about on the podcast, Chris, has been like comments from negative comments from NBA stars about Memphis and its hotels and whatnot. Shout out to Mike Miller for planting his roots here and doing something that's pretty cool.
I got a question. I don't know if you know the answer to this, and even if you do, I'm not looking for a hyper specific answer. I don't mean like I'm not looking for like the name of a specific hotel or anything. But do you have any when these guys are here training? Like, where are they staying? Are they staying in downtown hotels, or are they staying in out east, more East Memphis-y kind of hotels, or is there like a dormitory near the barn, or like
I
how's
don't
that
have an
working?
answer to that. I believe they stay close to where it's located. We don't
Okay.
need to, like, Mike lives there, so we don't need to give away where it is.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. I
Um,
wasn't. I didn't mean super specific, but
yeah, I think they're staying close to where the facility is, and I like again, you got to go read the story to really appreciate it because it's just super cool. Like it's just like this super cool facility. Another really awesome like place in Memphis for basketball players to go play. I know they did a lot of work on the sports and events center and all that, and we have EYBL tournaments here and stuff. This is obviously a different type of venue, but really awesome, really great story. The pictures are great. So go check that out on the Daily Memphian website. And all four of those guys, by the way, were guys that said that they plan to meet with Memphis if they had not already met with Memphis at the combine. So they'll be right here
All
and
right.
available to do workouts.
Here's a couple more questions for you then. Which lift client in the 2026 draft is most likely to be a member of the Memphis Grizzlies?
I think if you were to guess now, you would have to go a Corey based on
That,
where they are in the draft.
that was going to be my answer. Yeah.
Because I think he has some skills that the Grizzlies would, have a priority on, especially with his ability to get in the lane. And, you know, Isolo all last season was talking about paint touches, paint touches, paint touches. Well, that's what a Corey does. Like he's
Yeah.
not one of the best shooting guards among all the point guards in the draft. He's not gonna like burn you from 3-point range, but he can get in the paint. He can make things happen. He can create for other players, and he's in the range where he would be available to the Grizzlies. I also think he kind of fits the vibe, like the smart Stanford kid that
Right.
I feel like with their recent draft picks that he kind of matches personality wise with the rest of the team and what they've tried to build. And so I would go him. Although I do think Phylon is the better player. I just don't know if he'll be there at 16.
Right.
What do you think?
Um, no, that was going to be my answer for a lot of those reasons, both in terms of like being there at 16. It feels like a Corey is creeping. You still see him like early second, late first in some mocks, but it really feels like he's creeping up more into that range where that pick at 16 is in this draft. And the point I was just making a minute ago about who you take at 3 and the kind of guards that fit. If you end up with a Boozer who's going to run a lot of offense through him, more of a pure scorer type like a Corey, I think maybe it makes a little bit more sense than a guy who's going to have to run the offense necessarily. And I also think it's also the kind of potential upside swing they may be like interested in doing if it makes sense, where they pick. Do you think if this gets into territory you don't want to talk about, that's fine too. But I'm interested in, we have an NBA team in Memphis. We have a major NBA agent in Memphis. There's been relationships between those two things in the past, including 2 stints as a player, by the way, Mike Miller with the Memphis Grizzlies, one of them with the current owner, Robert Pera. But he also represented John Morant for a while, right? I have to assume, like, everyone's a professional and they would be able to do business regardless. But I'm guessing Miller not representing Morant probably makes it easier to do business with Miller with his clients he has now in this
Oh,
draft.
certainly. I don't want to overspeak here and say too much, but I mean,
Right,
obviously everyone knows that the relationship between the Grizzlies and Ja Morant does not seem to be in peak form at the moment.
right,
And so if you were representing a player that was, someone that the franchise was attempting to trade, that certainly makes things more tense. And
right,
so, yes, I don't think that I would not look into at all like the idea that the Grizzlies would take someone because he's represented by Mike Miller or not take someone because he's
right.
represented by Mike Miller.
Sure.
I just don't think that would be a thing at all. They're just trying to find the best players. Representation does not matter. The other thing on the Mike Miller clients, I really do like Joshua Jefferson, but with the Boozer thing, it doesn't really match. But I think he's a good player that's going to end up.
But if it's Peterson, it's a
But if
different
it's
story.
Peterson, yeah,
Yeah.
no, I am in the process of putting together, and I spent a lot of time on it, so I'm looking forward to when it comes out. I think it'll be out this weekend at some point. But I've been in the process of building a story that sort of breaks down Peterson, Wilson, Boozer, and I think through the piece, it's helped me kind of confirm that I think Boozer's the likely choice, and that maybe I would take him above Peterson, honestly. But I think that Peterson is you can't go wrong. I just think it. Anyway, got sidetracked. But Jefferson's interesting because when you look at Boozer's passing and playmaking, which is the separating skill that we already talked about, Jefferson is like the only other forward in this draft class that can do some of the same things that Boozer did. In fact, one
Right.
of the things that I really like about Boozer's game is that he doesn't he has a higher turnover rate, but his assist to turnover is also better than than Wilson and Peterson. But he doesn't just pass to make a safe play. He passes to make a play, if that makes sense, to make a scoring play. And that
Right.
comes through with like the rim assists that he creates, the 3-point shots that Boozer creates through his passing. And the only player with better numbers from a forward perspective than Boozer in these passing categories is Joshua Jefferson. Like I think
Right.
if you're trying to find another player later in the draft that could turn out to be better than you think, Joshua Jefferson is one I would keep my eye on. I really do like him as a prospect. I just don't know if it's going to fit with Memphis based on where they are. Okay, let's talk playoffs. That game one between the Spurs and the Thunder was a spiritual experience. That
It
was
was
incredible.
it was a absolutely fantastic basketball watching experience. My son even came down. He has not been into all the games, but he's into Wemby, and he came down, and we're both just laughing and cackling, and you know all of the sounds you make when Wemby does stuff like we're making them, and that pull up three in overtime. That was so. I haven't memorized everything that's happened in basketball all season, but I gotta think that's one of the two great basketball moments in terms of individual plays that's happened this season. I'm talking across basketball. It's the Braylon Mullins shot in the Final Four against Duke, and it's that Wemby pull up. And the Mullins shot meant more specifically in the moment because
I
it's
think
an
that was the Elite
elimination.
Eight. That was the Elite Eight.
Yeah, Elite Eight to get to the Final Four over Duke. And so that meant more in the specific moment. It's an elimination game. It's a shot, to get you to get to the Final Four. I can't remember what it was. It was a game winner, right?
Think so, yeah.
Yeah. And that was when I watched that with my dad, and that's when you literally leap out of the chair and go, "Whoa!" The Wimby shot wasn't as meaningful in the very specific way, but it was maybe more meaningful in a grander way because that was a moment of arrival for like a generationally great player. For him to do that in that moment, it's one of those things that like if you witness it live and you're a basketball fan, you're going to remember having seen that live.
There's so many ways I can go from here, but I have to point out that it was actually the Dan Levitard show was where I saw it first. I saw a clip of it on the internet. One of the all-time great Homer radio calls from OKC on the Wemby shot because I don't know who it is that does the play-by-play for the Thunder, but hilarious radio call on the Wemby shot. He's like, Wembanyama's got the ball. He's coming up the floor, whatever. The Thunder lead by 3. He pulls up from 30 feet. It's in. It's just like he pulls up from 30 feet. It's in there. That's it. This was like no reaction. Just like to one of the best shots. Just no reaction. One of the all-time great Homer radio calls, and I love it. There's nothing better than that. So go watch that clip if you haven't seen it yet. It's so funny.
I showed my wife. I showed my wife the clip from the post game of that game of Wemby with his arm around Carter Bryant. I showed her the photo, and it was like, "How tall is that dude on the left?" She said, "I don't know, 5'9", 6'8".
Yeah.
That child that Wemby has his arm around is 6'8".
The other two Wemby points I want to make. One, I said this earlier on the radio, so apologies if you were listening and you're listening to this twice. I have one friend that's a big hockey fan. He grew up in Boston. He watches the Celtics, but he doesn't watch other NBA teams. And had never watched Wemby before. And some of us in the group chat were convincing him to tune into the game. And he was just texting profanities the whole time. Like, this guy is a freak. I can't believe this, And it was
Right.
just, I got joy in somebody, enjoying basketball like that because of the talent level and just how outrageous it is. The stuff he does is just should not be possible on a basketball court.
I mean, and it happened at least twice last night. I think it seems like it happens like twice a game, every game. He drives for a layup and he misses the layup, but he tips it in with his other hand on the opposite side of the goal, like in one motion.
It's not just that. It's like when he drives. No one's ever done this
before.
It's when he drives, he's 2 steps behind the 3-point line. He takes 1 dribble and 2 steps and he's dunking. Right? Yeah. It's like no one else can do. Maybe Giannis. Like Giannis is the only one that also does that. But it's just crazy how much ground he covers because of the physical tools. It's just wild. But that felt like watching history, not just like watching basketball. Watching game 1 felt like watching history. And so that was an incredible game.
Thought, shout out to an obscure sports personality you probably haven't heard of, but I think Bill Simmons sort of this was a good one. This was a good one from Bill in one of his pods this week. He likened it to watching that game to watching Tiger Woods at the 1997 Masters. That kind of thing. Like a guy arriving that suddenly and just like, taking this thing and like just playing with it. I mean, it was that kind of, it did feel kind of like that.
With that said, I'm worried Spurs aren't going to make it to the finals.
No,
I want to see it. I know, but
I will say to be 1-1, now you're going to San Antonio and presumably they'll get De'Aaron Fox back. And for all the excitement over Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper, I think they should be very happy to get De'Aaron Fox into this series. I mean, they don't have other guards, and Castle's averaging like 10 turnovers a game in the first 2 games. Against this Thunder defense, I think you need a veteran guard, a ball handler. I think that would help them a lot. So I think Fox could give them a pretty big boost going back to San Antonio.
All right. Now let Doomsday Drew come out.
All right.
Because I want to see Wemby in the Garden in the finals. That's what I want to see.
Yes.
I think that's what everybody wants if you're a casual basketball watcher.
Yep.
I watched game 1. I was excited about the fact that the Spurs won because I thought we were going to get I thought it was pretty meaningful. And then I took a step back and I was like, if this is what it's going to take to stop the Thunder, that you're going to have Shea and Chet being absolutely terrible in a game and a Wemby Steph Curry 3-pointer and a double overtime win just to get game 1. I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know if it's going to happen. Maybe I'm putting too much into it, but it just felt like the Thunder played a C game and the Spurs played a B+A game, and that's what it took to win. And so then you come back for game 2, the Thunder get game 2, and yeah, the Spurs made it interesting. It was 6 and then it was 4, but then now you're piling up Fox injuries, Harper injury. You have the Jalen Williams injury on the OKC side. I just feel like OKC is still a step ahead right now.
I mean, Thunder were my pick for the season, just like they were yours. I stuck with them when the playoffs started reluctantly. I hope I'm wrong. I think it's a toss-up now, but that Thunder team is ridiculously good, and there's just the level of defensive talent they put on the floor 1 through 5 across 48 minutes is just stupid. And that's why I think they need Fox to have another ball handler to deal with that pressure. But the fact that they got one in OKC, I think it's a very for real series now. And so to me it's coin flippy. It
feels like the finals already.
I do think if it's New York, that will give the actual finals the gravitas it needs, especially if it's Wemby. If we get Spurs Knicks and it's Wemby in the Garden, it won't feel like, this is the after party. We've already had the party. It'll feel like that's the real thing.
I 100% agree. I also think if it's Thunder Knicks, still New York, which has been deprived of good basketball for a long time.
Yeah.
The atmosphere will be incredible. And New York does have the best defense if you're going to go based off of just playoff efforts so far. If you go to cleaning the glass and look at defensive efficiency, it's been New York. I don't think that's actually the case.
I think
they have wing defenders that they can throw at the Thunder Stars.
No, they do. They have some. They're big. Other than Brunson, they're big around Brunson. I don't think I think the Thunder are the best defense, regardless. But I do think that's a team for a team that has Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns on the team. They're sort of surprisingly good defensively, considering they have two bad defenders at the core of their team. But yeah, no, I think that'd be an interesting matchup. I think I can get into that because all the forces of good, the basketball gods, and all of our collective will be behind the Knicks, trying to get them across the finish line against the Thunder. Cavs Thunder is the one that it's just hard to muster enthusiasm for.
Yeah, it would be. It's also interesting that it feels like we just talked about them being able to hide Brunson, but the Cavs were not able to hide James Harden at the end of game one. Like they just picked on him over and over and over again every time he went back on defense. And now you have Kenny Atkinson coming out today and essentially saying, I believe James Harden is a good isolation defender. It feels like it was a vote of confidence to some degree, the dreaded vote of confidence.
Right.
But I don't know. What do you make of Harden in the playoffs? He's obviously had his struggles.
Well, Harden's always been hot and cold as a postseason player. And then defensively, I think he's a guy who's often been at his best guarding up. Not guarding the Jalen Brunsons of the world, guarding, he's had good moments like on Jaren, in the past. I think he is pretty strong. So he's tended to be better when you can get him onto a forward than when his foot speed get caught up trying to guard on the perimeter. And so I think the Knicks were successful in getting him into bad spots. And so I think if you're the Cavs, you need to adjust to try to keep him out of those spots as much as you can.
Do you give the Cavs much of a chance after that collapse?
I do, because I think talent-wise, they're right there with the Knicks. And I think Donovan Mitchell is a big game player in a lot of the ways that Brunson is. And I just think the talent is so close, and that game was so close. I mean, the Cavs, probably should have won that game. And so, yeah, no, I think that's serious. I give the Knicks. I think I favor the Knicks more than I favor either team in the other series, but I don't consider them an overwhelming favorite after one game.
Who were your finals picks? Remind me when we did the pod.
Well, before the season, it was Thunder Knicks, and then I changed it before the playoffs to Thunder Celtics, which did not work out.
I think I had Thunder and someone. Definitely did not have the Celtics. But I had the Celtics and the Spurs, I think, in the playoff pod that we did. Pre-playoff pod?
Yeah, you had Spurs Celtics in that one. I think you had Thunder Knicks just like me before the season.
Yeah. Well, I would be okay with that. Everybody wants Spurs and Knicks, I feel like, at this point. But if you were to pick now, would you change at all?
I mean, I wouldn't change Knicks. I'll go Spurs. I'll go Spurs Knicks. I think we're going to get it. I think to me, it's close enough between those teams without Fox. You add Fox to the mix, I think it's a tipping point in that series. Yeah.
I will stick with Thunder Knicks, but I hope I'm wrong. All right, that'll do it for us this week. We'll be back next week talking more draft. Hopefully we'll have a big breakdown of Boozer, Wilson, Peterson to talk about, as well as several other things. Oh, we failed to mention that Cedric Coward was named first team all rookie.
Yeah, he held on. I was worried he was going to fade there because of the way him missing games and then the team sort of going in the tank, so to speak. I was worried that I thought it'd be Ace Bailey. Ended up being Maxime Renault, or however you say his name, from Sacramento, who was the closest. It was a close call, but Coward did sneak through, so that was good.
You may have been French in another life. That was good.
Yeah, I don't know. I garbled my way to acceptability, I guess.
All right, we'll be back. See you later.